Goomy! What is up, guys? Steven here, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be responding to Verlisify's video titled The Death of Smogon. Now, I basically just want to respond in a way that reflects my opinion, and I'm not trying to say that Verlisify's opinion is wrong, because I don't think that an opinion can be incorrect, but I wanted to put my thoughts out there on why I believe what I believe and why my opinion is what my opinion is. So the basic premise of Verlisify's video, which will be linked down in the description so you can look to see if any of the quotes that I reference are set out of context, or you can kind of get your own feel for his video. Basically the premise is that Baton Pass should not have been banned, and Smogon went against its own tiering policies in order to do the Baton Pass ban. So I disagree with that, and let's just get right into it. So the first quote that I'm going to reference here is Verlisify says that banning Baton Pass contradicts Smogon's reasoning for banning other Pokemon. My response to that is Baton Pass is a move, not a Pokemon, so it has to have different tiering considerations. More than one Mon learns Baton Pass. There are actually a lot of Pokemon that learn Baton Pass, so it's going to have a more widespread effect if it is an effective strategy, due to the fact that there are so many different ways that Baton Pass can be utilized with all of the different strategies in Pokemon that do learn the move. And so yeah, the next comment that Verlisify makes is that this was a quick ban based off replays, referencing the replays that are in the announcement post for Baton Pass's ban, which I'll also link in the description. This is just objectively not true. The Baton Pass ban was based on discussions within the You Counsel, community feedback, and there was also a policy review thread that allowed members to talk about the different aspects of Baton Pass and say whether or not they believed it would be banned. So it was not banned off of choice picked replays that were in the thread. Those replays actually just reflected why Baton Pass was considered to be unhealthy for the metagame, and was kind of accumulation of the thoughts of, again, the You Counsel, community feedback, and that policy review thread. So this next quote is paraphrased. It says, "I don't know if it's democratic that only 100 people get to vote when there are so many users on the website." I guess the easiest response to that is, in presidential elections, would you want 3-year-olds to be able to have as much power as individuals who have more life experience and can make a more informed decision? No. Everyone on Smogon has an equal opportunity to get voting requirements, which is democratic. Verlisify has just as equal opportunity as I do in order to get voting requirements, and therefore it is a democratic process, because there's nothing preventing him from voicing his own opinion. Just being able to show that your opinion is informed by having enough knowledge about the current metagame to succeed in it, in order to actually make that vote. Yes, so he also mentioned that he has never actually gone through the voting process, which I think is interesting, just from the perspective of you can't really know whether or not it's democratic if you didn't actually go through the process, and you have an infinite amount of opportunity to get the requirements that the people who do get to vote also have. So the next quote is just a very short one, where Verlisify says, "My opinion is valid," which is correct. However, he then follows it up by saying, I know more than the average Smogon player does about the banning process because I have made a lot of videos on it. Now, I don't think that making videos on a topic necessarily proves anything. I could sit here and talk as much as I want about astrophysics, but that doesn't mean I have any knowledge or background on it. And I know that that's kind of a bit of hyperbole because, you know, astrophysics is obviously a lot more complex than the political voting scheme of a Pokemon website. But I think that it is comparable and is a good good example, just in terms of, you know, just because you're talking about something doesn't necessarily mean you have more knowledge of it. And I also think that saying you have more knowledge because you make videos of it is just a little bit demeaning and brings in people's intelligence and personal abilities, which is really unnecessary when voicing your opinion and trying to prove your point. I think that actually hurts your argument when you bring in people's intelligence into the fray. Alright, so the next quote is, instead of playing around it, they ban it. That's the safe space of Smogon. Now this I disagree with. The safe space of Smogon is actually promoting competitive and skill-based play, in my opinion. Baton Pass is heavily matchup based and ends up being a flowchart. What I mean by that is that as a Baton Pass player, in any given situation there is a play that you basically just make no matter what, and if your opponent responds in a certain way, you then make the next play following a flowchart, which removes the skill element from the game. So not only does this remove this removes player interaction from the game, in that the person playing Baton Pass doesn't necessarily have to think, they just follow the flowchart, and lessens the influence of skill on a game's outcome because it becomes more predicated on whether or not you have a good matchup against Baton Pass that makes the flowchart end up in a scenario where they lose. Okay. The next quote is, he actually directly quoted this from the announcement thread, which says there are 100% ways to stop BP. Then he said on his own, if you do stop BP, those teams fall apart. In your video, you conveniently choose to ignore the justification directly before that in the thread that states that BP has incredibly limited counterplay. So even though there are 100% ways to stop BP, they are extremely limited. Also, since BP it was currently banned down to one user per team, those teams can function without the BP aspect. So I disagree that those teams completely fall apart if you don't have, if you can shut down BP, because the other 5 mons can work independently and get you into a scenario where the Baton Pass can come back into play, as Scolipede does have a great ability and speed boost that allows it to get speed against a lot of opponents. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to get into is Verlisify then follows up, following on the theme of counterplay, by saying that Smogon players lack fundamentals like Roar and Whirlwind, and that there are other counters like Infiltrator. In my opinion, these are not reliable ways of handling BP, as every BP team will carry a Magic Bounce Pokemon. In particular, Espeon is the one that will be on pretty much all of those teams, and you know, you could say, oh, well, you can predict the Espeon and switch into something that would counter it. Not necessarily, because Baton Pass goes after you switch or before if you don't switch, because you have the boosted speed. So you can, again, follow the flowchart and react accordingly to what the opponent does. So you say, oh, I just get to go right into T-Tar as he Baton Passes into Espeon. Not necessarily, because they'll just Baton Pass then into the Manaphy that can then beat your team. So they always have the switch advantage. And with Espeon on the teams, you know, Roar and Whirlwind are not reliable. And because Roar and Whirlwind aren't reliable, and Unaware is also unreliable due to the way that stored power mechanics work, BP is pretty much invalidated stall as a playstyle in those matchups. You really cannot win a stall versus BP matchup if you're playing a competent BP player. And Infiltrator has poor distribution, and Scolipede also just protects to get the speed. In front of your Infiltrator mon, I believe the only one that actually outspeeds would be Scarf Crobat at +1, which is not a very viable Pokemon in the current OU metagame, and they then get to pass to the appropriate switch-in before taking a hit. Alright, so let's get into the next quote. Verlisify says that you can have a team that does well versus Baton Pass and Standard, and that's basically the point of the ban. The OU Council and community, and after discussion in the policy review thread, believe that you cannot achieve this, and that's why this ban is taking place, because they honestly believe that you cannot achieve that. As I stated earlier, Baton Pass is flowcharting and takes the skill out of the hands of the players in a team matchup. You're at a competitive disadvantage if you run the limited BP counters, such as various Haze Mons that are not reliable, and things like Prankster, Encore Mons, and things like that are just not reliable. In addition, the BP users actually also have counterplay. To your counterplay, it's not as if you run those Mons and you automatically win and they just can't do anything because they don't have BP, like I said earlier. And the main counterplay is trapping, which is achieved through Dugtrio, which can eliminate the answers that actually are available, such as Hades, Toxapex, and such. Okay, so the next quote that Verlisify states is that OU is only OU. You should only use OU Pokemon, not try to mesh Pokemon from other tiers together. This is just objectively false. You have the options to use Pokemon from any tier in OU, barring Ubers / anything goes, which is just Mega Rayquaza. You can use anything in OU, and many of the best teams actually utilize Pokemon from lower tiers, such as Crawdon, Uxie, Muck, and more. So it's just objectively untrue. Potentially, what he was trying to say is that that's the philosophy of a lot of players, but I don't think that the best players have that philosophy, and that's just my opinion. The next thing that Verlisify says is that again in Smogon's threads and things like that, it says every Pokemon has a surefire counter. While this may be true, the key delineation is that the counters have to be viable in the metagame. Going back to the tiering policy thread that you were referencing in your video, Verlisify, you got to be able to use counters that don't give you a large competitive disadvantage in other matchups. Although there are counters that exist to every Pokemon, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Pokemon is that the potentially ban-worthy Pokemon is balanced, because having to use those niche counters gives you a competitive disadvantage, which does limit team building. If you're forced to use one niche counter on your team, then you can only build certain ways from that starting point. So that actually does limit team building, and you would be at a competitive disadvantage by using that counter. Okay, so the next thing, I paraphrase this as well, is basically the argument that Smogon users use the argument that a Pokemon is impossible to counter due to the fact that it has multiple move sets, and oh well, I have 2 different move sets and you can't counter them both. And while I agree that this can be a bad argument if used poorly, I do think that the versatility and unpredictability of the Pokemon in question is pertinent to its tiering. If multiple answers have to be run due to the prevalence of completely different but also viable sets that have different counters and checks, it can limit team building by taking up to 1/3 of your team if you have to run a counter to one viable set and a counter to another viable set. You are already taking up 1/3 of your team just by answering one Pokemon, and again, that makes team building have less diversity due to the fact that you have to use those answers, and if you don't, then you're just going to lose to the Pokemon that may be banned, and you also have to start in that same place if you want to beat it, which puts you at a competitive disadvantage again. That again goes into the tiering policy, talking about gimmicky answers. Gimmicky doesn't necessarily mean like creative, it just means an answer that, you know, basically only serves that one function and puts you at a competitive disadvantage in other matchups. So the next quote I'm going to mention is, you say that, as it says in the announcement of Baton Pass ban, that Magirna and Crossman are two of the best Speed Pass recipients. That's what it says in the thread. And you responded with, "This is a subjective personal decision by the OU leader to ban you know, Baton Pass because they keep losing to Baton Pass and Magirna and Crossman as you know, like that." So basically, it is subjective that those are two of the best Speed Pass recipients, but it's not personal. If they weren't two of the best Speed Pass recipients, they wouldn't be on every Baton Pass team, and they are on every Baton Pass team because everyone, you know, that is running Baton Pass finds subjectively that those two Pokemon fill that role of being a Speed Pass recipient better than anything else in the metagame. So that's why they're running those Pokemon, because they're the best at what they do. And again, this is a decision that's made by the OU Council, community feedback, and the policy thread, not just the OU leader who made the announcement. I'm not sure if you actually believe that, you know, that the OU leader who made the announcement is the only person that made the decision, because that's just not the case. It's just objectively not true. And saying that it was a personal decision by him is just a little bit, I think that that's just a little bit uninformed. So, okay, the next quote I'm going to go into, Smogon players are mad that they lose to it. I disagree. Smogon players do not like seeing the skillful elements of the game being diminished, and would rather not have to use Pokemon that puts them at a competitive disadvantage. Really, the point of Smogon tiering is to create a balanced competitive metagame, and you know, being in a situation that, you know, forces you to either lose to this niche playstyle or use a Pokemon that just gives you a disadvantage is not a choice that is, you know, wonderful at all. So you're pretty much in kind of a catch-22, and it's not that they're mad that they lose to it. It's just that they don't like the fact that there's less skill involved due to the flowcharty nature of Baton Pass. So the next quote, which again is a paraphrase, is that, you know, Sleep Claws shouldn't exist because of other nerfs that have been put through the generations and low accuracy that sleep moves generally have, and you even mentioned stuff like Swagger plus T-Wave due to the nerfs that they received, such as T-Wave only having 90% accuracy and Confusion being nerfed in this gen. But again, the low accuracy of sleep moves turns the game more into the odds of hitting a sleep move versus skill, which again removes the skillful element of the game and makes it less competitive. And it's kept in the sleep clause is kept in place then because it actually promotes competitive play. Again, the same thing is similar in terms of Swagger plus T-Wave. Yes, they were, you know, yes, Swagger was nerfed, and yes, Thunderwave was nerfed. However, there's a lot less skill involved with facing a team that utilizes, you know, paralysis plus confusion chance, and just hoping that you either get fully paralyzed or hit yourself, versus playing against not that kind of strategy, which is not as reliant on luck. Alright, so your next quote is, "It's a kid's game about fun, but no fun for Smogon users." You brought up the fact that it's a kid's game a lot in your video, which I just found kind of interesting because it's not really pertinent to your argument. And the other thing is that you don't have to play by Smogon rules. Like, just because you have a different opinion, which is fine. But some people's opinion is different than yours and find that Smogon rules are more competitive and fun. Like, if you don't enjoy Smogon rules, you just don't have to play it. You know, again, like, my opinion is I enjoy the competitive nature and I enjoy the current rule set, and that's why I play Smogon. If I stop enjoying it, then I won't play it anymore. You know, like, it's just as simple as that. So the next comment which you made, which I'm going to paraphrase again, is that Necrozma is a legendary and it's already restrictive on team building, and that's why Baton Pass was banned, because Crossman is great at receiving speed boosts, and it's a legendary, etc. So this is just a horrible argument, actually, because it's only used in OU on Baton Pass teams, as evidenced by the fact that Necrozma is actually never used by usage, and therefore Baton Pass must be the larger issue, not Necrozma. In fact, players really don't care whether or not a Pokemon has legendary status. As someone who plays NU, you know, I know that there are actually a lot of legendaries and Ultra Beasts, etc., that reside in the NU tier, because they're not as effective in the metagame, which is what determines where they're tiered. So saying that, you know, Necrozma is a legendary and Magearna is a legendary really doesn't actually have any effect on the decision, and it just kind of shows that you're not necessarily informed about the policy on, you know, or the thought process on Necrozma, because it's really only used on Baton Pass teams, and that's why it's an NU. Okay, the next thing that she said is that checks aren't allowed in Smogon's banning process. Your argument was predicated on the fact that you know, you can switch Animon, and for example, you could switch something in on Metagross and paralyze it or burn it or whatever. And having checks like that is, you know, what is fine. You know, but checks aren't allowed, and that's why stuff like Metagross gets banned. But that's just not true. Checks are actually encouraged to be mentioned in counterban arguments, as it can give players a better idea of how people actually play around the threat, and whether there are checks that have good roles in the metagame that can also affect the Pokemon in question. Arguing that an opponent will let you get their threat, you know, status without using proper team support and not switching out against checks is also not a fair argument, because you have to assume that both players make the best play possible. In addition, by definition, a defensive check, which is basically what you're referencing in your video, can't switch in on the Pokemon, so it's got to be at full HP to check it, which means you're either sacking something or double switching dangerously, which is why counters are needed for offensive threats, which is again why having viable counters is important, because you don't want to be put at a competitive disadvantage by using a counter that doesn't perform well against the rest of the metagame just for one Pokemon. And yeah, so really I think your argument there is a little bad, and that kind of goes into the next thing that you say, which is that Pokemon isn't played in a vacuum. You can use Death Fodder to gain momentum, and you're right, Pokemon isn't played in a vacuum, and that's why having to fodder something every time a threat comes in is bad, because, you know, that Pokemon supports the rest of its team by performing well against the Pokemon that its teammates struggle with. So you're like, oh, you just Death Fodder and get your momentum again. But if it's something that it's a check, it's like, yes, it's come in and gotten its kill. Now you're switching in a check, which doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the opponent just has to stay in and let their thing die, as well as the fact that whatever you Death Foddered most likely opens up a hole for another Pokemon on that person's team to succeed, assuming that they're using good team building practices. That's why you pair things that work well together, so that if you're forced to sack something, then the other thing can succeed. So you're right, it's not played in a vacuum, and just saying, oh, well, now I've dealt with, you know, X Pokemon because I've sacked something and brought in a check, doesn't necessarily mean that that's healthy, because if you're forced to sack something, then every time that mon comes in, then really that's just unhealthy, because your team will slowly get picked apart, and it's not really, it doesn't promote competitive play. All right, and the next argument is, again, something that you referenced in the Baton Pass announcement, which is that, oh, we're allowed to sack a Pokemon, but you aren't. And this references the line that says, the main thing that stops in Crossman is dark types, and the Baton Pass player can sack something to trap the dark type with Dugtrio, and then eventually win with Necrozma. And you said, we're allowed to sack a Pokemon, but you aren't. Kind of like how I just talked about the bad things about having to sack a Pokemon. Well, the difference is that Baton Pass teams function differently than standard teams, and that the goal is to have one Pokemon sweep all 6 of the opponent's Pokemon. And that's just the difference in delineation, and why Baton Pass has to be a special consideration. You can't just go in with the mindset of, oh, well, I can't sack them on with my standard team, but you can with your Baton Pass team. That's just because each member fulfills a different role on a Baton Pass team. So, foddering something to set up a scenario in which you can sweep all 6 of the opponent's Pokemon is not detrimental to Baton Pass players, as it's not as detrimental to Baton Pass players as it is to most standard teams, due to the fact that the goal is to have one Pokemon win against all 6. So you don't need all 6. Really, you need 2. You need Scolipede and whatever you're trying to win with, and that's pretty much it. So that is why I disagree with that argument. I think that in principle you're right in that it is odd to say having to sack something in most standard situations, but in this scenario being different can seem like it's contradictory, but it's really not, just because Baton Pass is so different. It's a completely different way to play the game, and that's why it has to have special considerations, as I mentioned at the beginning. Then the next quote I'm going to say is that you say that the You Counsel tricked mindless sheep into believing what they believe, and I don't really see how insulting people's opinion proves your own argument. And as you could actually see in your video, over 200 people liked the post of the banning of BP. So perhaps it wasn't just the Smogon elite, as you said, that wanted this change. It was a combination of the OU Council, community feedback, and policy review thread. And the last thing that I'm going to quote from you is that you say, without all these bans and stuff, Smogon players just suck at official formats, which is just, again, objectively untrue. Nails has the most championship points of any North American player in VGC 17, and Blairjean top cut nationals in VGC 16. And there are not necessarily a lot of players from Smogon that have ventured out into VGC, but the majority of them that have actually had a lot of success, and will be going to the World Championships this year. And I don't believe that you will be participating in the World Championships. So I don't think that Smogon players necessarily suck, because they are doing better than you, and obviously you don't really play Smogon, so you must have experience in the official formats. So in conclusion, Baton Pass takes away skill from the player and causes an unfun, flowcharty game dependent on team matchup, and I agree with the Baton Pass ban for these reasons.